Well, you say that we diverted our troop strength from Afghanistan, didn't catch bin Laden, moved into Iraq, are fighting a civil war, a middle of a civil war now rather than fighting terrorism. But you also mentioned a second front. I think you're talking about a third front, really, the possibility of us going into Iran. Here is Vice President Cheney talking about Iran today.
The Iranian regime needs to know that if it stays on its present course, the international community is prepared to impose meaningful consequences.
Well, Mr. Murtha, I don't believe Vice President Cheney engages in bluffs. So what's he talking about?
Well, it's unfortunate that we've heard so much rhetoric from the administration. We've heard this over and over and over again, and it does nothing but make it more difficult to solve the problem. This is an international problem in Iran. We have to use international communications, international diplomacy, and when you make statements like that, you make it very difficult to solve it diplomatically. For instance, right now, we couldn't deploy to Iran. Most people don't realize Iran is 3 times in geographical bigger than Iraq, and 58 million people versus 26 million. It's not possible. Our military is stretched so thin, there's no way we could deploy to a second front and then sustain that front. So it's ridiculous to make it talk like, well, we could take all the options off the floor. It could be a military option. There's no way we can do that. Now, our intelligence was so bad in Iraq that I don't believe we have better intelligence in Iran. And so if they're talking about using bombing strikes in Iran, you got to have world support for that. The public is against us going into Iran. They're for getting out of Iraq, for heaven's sake. So, you know, the rhetoric, the biggest thing, Chris, the biggest argument I have with this administration, they've been overly optimistic about what's happening in Iraq. They keep saying things are going well. The president said mission accomplished. Since he said mission accomplished, we've lost 2,000 people in Iraq. We have 20,000 casualties in Iraq. And they keep saying we don't need this many people. We're not going to redeploy. The Iraqis had their election. Let them take over. We've got to give them guidelines and a timeline to say, okay, folks, this is your government. You got to fight for your democracy. If you want democracy, you got to fight for it.
Well, let me talk to you about Iran, because you know something about this military situation. I expect a lot. If we were to do a surgical strike on Iraq, or Iran rather, and knocked out what we thought were their nuclear facilities and set them back a couple of years, what would be the danger to America in that kind of approach?
Well, in the first place, Chris, I don't think it's necessary to even think about that in the near term. They're not close to having nuclear capability. So what we need to do is stress diplomatic relations. We need to work with Russia. We need to work with these other countries. One of the problems we have is when we go off on our own, we get no support from anybody else. You remember in the '91 war, how President Bush not only got support from the international community, they paid for the war. They paid the $60 billion, and we're going to spend $450 billion in this war by the end of this year. Money that could be spent much better someplace else. And that doesn't even take care of the upgrading the military. And the other thing that's happening when the military gets stretched too thin like it is, the problem is that we can't scare anybody. In other words, when Cheney makes a threat like that, it falls on deaf ears because they know darn well we couldn't accept it. But the big thing is, as much money as we spend on intelligence, we don't know where the targets are. We don't know exactly what we need to do. So there's no use even talking about a military strike.